My entire family and fiancé cut me off after my sister betrayed me, and now I'm lost, needing advice because I don't know what to do anymore. I was only 21 when my fiancé proposed to me. He was the brightest part of my world. We had known each other since kindergarten, and our families were super close. He often came over for meals, and we would do the same at his place. Though he didn't have any siblings, I had two older sisters, and that mattered because he had grown close to them, too. We basically grew up side by side. When we started dating, our parents couldn't stop celebrating for weeks on end. He supported me through many of my struggles with anxiety, and even when I gained a bit of weight and my mother mocked me, saying he'd leave, he stood up for me. He assured her that he loved me for who I was and always called me the most beautiful woman in the world. We were only engaged for 6 months before everything went wrong. My middle sister, let's call her Nikki, was a cold person, never showing much affection. The only person she opened up to was my fiancé, whom she treated like a brother. He had helped her through a lot, including addiction struggles and legal troubles. Nikki and I never got along. I loved her because she was my sister, but honestly, I didn't like her as a person. Out of nowhere, she invited me out clubbing, saying she felt bad about being distant and wanted to bond. I agreed, even though clubbing wasn't my thing, but after a few drinks, I loosened up and started to enjoy myself. Everything was going well until Nikki spotted a guy and joked about wanting to climb him like a tree. She walked over to him, but after a few minutes, returned with an angry expression. I asked what was wrong, and she said the guy didn't want her number, he wanted mine instead. I tried to comfort her, saying he was a jerk and that plenty of guys would be lucky to have her, but she seemed upset. She told me she needed to use the restroom, and then we would leave. I waited for what felt like an eternity, sipping on more cocktails, and began feeling incredibly dizzy. I figured she had left without me, so I decided to head home. On my way out, I bumped into one of Nikki's friends, who asked if I needed help getting to my car. I explained I was getting a cab, and he offered to share one since he was leaving too. I agreed. After that, everything became a blur. I was trying to find my phone in my bag when I suddenly felt even dizzier. The next thing I knew, I blacked out. When I woke up the following morning, I was lying on a stiff sofa with a splitting headache. I realized I was in Nikki's friend's apartment. He explained that I had passed out in the cab, and since he didn't know my address, he brought me back to his place and laid me on the couch. I quickly asked him to call me a cab, worried that my fiancé would be freaking out. Once home, I walked in expecting concern from my family, but instead, I was hit with accusations. My fiancé immediately demanded how I could cheat on him. I was dumbfounded. Nikki chimed in, calling me a liar and claiming I had been flirting with random guys all night before leaving with her friend. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to explain everything, but nobody let me speak. Nikki showed pictures of me leaving the club with her friend, and in one of them, his hand was on my back, making it look much worse than it was. My fiancé lost it, yelling while our mothers cried. I begged Nikki to call her friend, sure he would back me up, but when she did, he told an entirely different story. He claimed I asked to go back to his place and that we slept together multiple times. I was devastated, knowing Nikki had set this whole thing up to destroy me. I pleaded with my fiancé to believe me, but he just walked away. After everyone left, my mother slapped me and threw me out of the house. In less than 48 hours, I was homeless and alone. I stayed with a friend for a few nights, crying and calling my fiancé, trying to make him believe me, but he never answered. My mom sent me cruel texts, calling me names, and even threw my belongings out without letting me pack. No one from my family sided with me, and I was left to fend for myself. For weeks, I tried to win back both my family and my fiancé, but it was hopeless. The final straw came during Christmas when I went to my parents' house to reconcile. They didn't answer the door, and later, I found out through Facebook that my entire family had gone out of state to celebrate Christmas, with my fiancé's family included. Seeing the pictures of them all smiling, so happy, broke me. I cried for days before finally blocking them all. My friend knew someone a few hours away who was looking for help in his restaurant and had an apartment above it. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I moved quickly, worked long hours, and saved up. Eventually, I left the apartment and rented a nicer place, still working at the restaurant, where I'm now the assistant manager. It's been 2 years since I left, and I haven't spoken to any of my family until my ex-fiancé showed up at my door recently. He explained that Nikki had confessed to lying about everything after getting married and feeling guilty for what she had done. He said my family had been trying to find me and that they all wanted to make amends. But I'm torn. While they didn't know she was lying, they still abandoned me without letting me share my side. I don't know if I can forgive them. Any advice would be appreciated. Part 2. The last time I shared my story, my ex-fiancé had just come to see me after 2 years, trying to reconnect. He said my family wanted to make amends after my sister had sabotaged me, making it look like I cheated. Well, I have an update for you. I never got back together with my ex. I was at a loss on how to handle things, but eventually, he must have given my phone number to my parents because they texted me, asking to meet up. I didn't reply and had planned to arrange a Zoom meeting instead, but that never happened because they showed up at my door. Well, my dad did. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, I instantly felt sick and ended up throwing up. My dad insisted on cleaning it up, and when he was done, we sat down. That's when I burst into tears. My emotions were all over the place, and the scent of his cologne, which he had worn for years, just brought back so many memories. He tried to hug me, but I pushed him away, demanding to know what he was doing there. He explained that he and my mother were getting a divorce. He said he had begged her to reach out to me the moment I left, but she refused, dismissing me as immature, saying that if I wanted to leave after what she believed I did, then I was on my own. I asked him how long it took them to realize I was even gone. He said they came back home after New Year's Eve and had planned to invite me over to talk, but that's when they got in touch with my friend and found out I had left without telling anyone where I was. I asked him why he didn't listen to my side of the story and why they abandoned me so easily. He started crying, saying he never intended for things to spiral out of control and that he wished he could take it all back. I reminded him how they had supported Nikki when they found out she was using drugs and had dropped out of school. Instead of turning their backs on her, we all went on a family vacation so she could escape her problems, but on that trip, she started drinking heavily. Even then, they stood by her time and time again. He admitted he had no idea my mother planned to kick me out. He thought it was just going to be a short-term thing and that I would come back home after a few days. Then, at the last minute, they decided to spend Christmas out of state, and my mother had promised him I would be allowed back home afterward. He claimed that all my stuff was still at their house, and that she had lied about throwing everything out. I asked him what had happened to Nikki. He said she was dead to him and that he wanted nothing to do with her. My mother, however, had been pleading with him to forgive Nikki because she wasn't well, and they had already lost one daughter, they couldn't lose another. But he had blocked my mother and Nikki, and he had been hounding my ex to find me. When my ex finally caved and told him where I lived, my dad showed up. I told him not to come back unless I gave him permission, and he agreed. He asked me what was going to happen now, and I told him I didn't know, but that he had hurt me deeply. I poured my heart out, detailing the pain they caused me, how devastated I was to see them move on without me, and how hard my life had been since then. By the end, we were both in tears, but I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. My dad offered to help me get a better apartment and job, but I turned him down, explaining that my boss had helped me so much and I wanted to stay loyal to him. I told my dad that if we were going to reconcile, it would have to be on my terms, and it would take a long time for me to trust him again, if I ever could. He promised he would do whatever it took to make up for what he did. I then asked why Nikki had done this to me, and if she had ever explained her reasons. My dad said Nikki believed my ex deserved better than me and wanted to see him happy because he had been making too many sacrifices in our relationship. She saw him as a brother and wanted to break off our engagement. So that night, she arranged for a friend to escort me out of the club, hoping to get compromising photos of me. That friend took me home, where I crashed on the sofa. Nothing happened. My ex was up all night playing video games until I woke up, and he had proof of it. My dad offered to collect my things from their house, but I told him I didn't want them anymore. I asked about Nikki's husband, and he said my mom had been tight-lipped about the whole situation but gave me his phone number. After my dad left, I nervously called Nikki's husband. I was sweating and feeling sick, wondering if I might hear her in the background. When he answered, I blurted everything out, which I regret. I should have eased him into it. He sounded confused, so I repeated the whole story, including her issues with drugs and alcohol. I expected him to defend her, but instead, he let out a long sigh. It turns out, he had suspected something was off. Nikki had caused problems between him and his sister, lying about her and creating a huge rift. His sister didn't even attend their wedding because of it. I apologized and told him he needed to make things right with his sister because Nikki was the real problem, not her. We talked a little more, and then he hung up. I don't know what he'll do with the information, but I hope he cuts his losses and leaves her because he seems like a nice guy who has lost a lot because of her. I've decided to reconcile with my dad. My mom has always controlled their marriage, so the fact that he's divorcing her and cutting Nikki out of his life shows he's serious about making things right. I don't think I'll ever reconcile with my mother, though. She still sees Nikki as a victim, and at this point, I'm not interested in hearing her excuses. If she reaches out, maybe we'll talk, but I doubt it. As for my ex, I haven't had the chance to meet with him yet. My dad said my ex wanted to come with him to see me, but he thought it would be too overwhelming for me. He also mentioned that my ex had been arrested for assaulting Nikki's friend, the one who lied about the whole situation. The charges were dropped after a few days. I'll update you all again when I have a chance to talk to my ex. Thank you for listening to my story. It's something I've kept bottled up for so long, and it feels good to finally let it all out.